Namaste. Mata Buddhir Janardana Tat Kim Karamani Gode Mam Niyoyad Yasikeshava. Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want me to engage in this ghastly warfare if you think intelligence is better than fruitive work? So I'll read the purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, has very elaborately described the constitution of the soul in the previous chapter, with a view to delivering his intimate friend Arjuna from the ocean of material grief. And the path of realization has been recommended, Buddhi Yoga, or Krishna consciousness. Sometimes Krishna consciousness is misunderstood to be inertia, and one with such a misunderstanding often withdraws to a secluded place to become fully Krishna conscious by chanting the holy name of Lord Krishna. But without being trained in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, it is not advisable to I lost my place. It is not advisable to chant the holy name of Krishna in a secluded place where one may acquire only cheap adoration from the innocent public. Arjuna also thought of Krishna consciousness or Buddhi Yoga or intelligence in spiritual advancement of knowledge as something like retirement from active life and the practice of penance and austerities at a secluded place. In other words, he wanted to skillfully avoid the fighting by using Krishna consciousness as an excuse. But as a sincere student, he placed the matter before his master and questioned Krishna as to his best course of action. In answer, Lord Krishna elaborately explained karma yoga, or work in Krishna consciousness, in this third chapter. Okay, so here's the next verse. Why nothing's working today. Okay. Vyamishreneva vakyena buddhim mohaya shiva me tadekam vada nishtitya yena shreyoham apnuyam. My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be more beneficial for me. So here's the purport. In previous chapter, as a prelude to the Bhagavad-gita, many different paths were explained, such as just Sankhya Yoga, Buddhi Yoga, control of the senses by intelligence, work without fruitive desire, and the position of the neophyte. This was all presented unsystematically. A more organized outline of the path would be necessary for action and understanding. Arjuna, therefore, wanted to clear up these apparently confusing matters so that any common man could accept them without misinterpretation. Although Krishna had no intention of confusing Arjuna by any jugglery of words, Arjuna could not follow the process of Krishna consciousness, either by inertia or active service. In other words, by his question, he is clearing the path of Krishna consciousness for all students who want to understand the mystery of the Bhagavad-gita. Okay. So this is the beginning of chapter 3. And chapter 3 is actually about the whole process of, well, chapter 3 talks a lot about duty, but we see here that Arjuna has an issue. His issue is that he thinks that giving up activities is actually the thing that Krishna is asking him to do, or maybe not Krishna's asking him to do, but that the Vedic literatures have always enjoined that a person should do. But this is not actually the case. So let me see if I can share my screen. Maybe I can do at least that much. Does this allow screen sharing?
Okay, now you should be able to share with Zoom.
How do I do that?
In the bottom of Zoom, there is a share screen button. It's like green and.
Oh, I see it. Right. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of a look at chapter 3. We have Arjuna's perplexity, which is these two verses that we're doing right now, 1 and 2. And then from 3 to 8, we have duty is not in action. Duty, the demigods and sacrifices, 9 to 16. Duty, perfection, and detachment, 17 to 19. Duty, leaders set example, from 20 to 25. And duty, different natures, from ignorant to the perfect, 26 to 36. And finally, at the end of this chapter, we have an interlude about lust, which is an important thing. So lust is what comes up as a topic at the end of chapter 3, when Krishna is talking with Arjuna and explaining about how a person should refrain and be very self-controlled. And then Arjuna blurts out, well, what happens if you can't control yourself? You do something even against your own will. And in this case, then Krishna answers with this little explanation about lust, and that's at the end of this chapter. But now, okay. So, any rate, this chapter 3, Arjuna asks a question on renunciation. Krishna explains about duties from various perspectives. Arjuna asks a question about impulsive action, in other words, lust, and then Krishna explains it. Now, here is the issue that Arjuna has. Arjuna wants to give up the fight, but Krishna wants Arjuna to give up the result of the fight. And this question is a theme that comes in chapters 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, and then chapter 18. So this issue isn't done in chapter 3. We'll see that Krishna Arjuna returns to it in chapter 5, and then again in chapter 18. So we first heard about fight for the sake of fighting, not considering loss or gain, in 2:38. And then in today's verse, 3:1, we're hearing about intelligence is better than fruit of work. Why is Krishna asking Arjuna to fight if intelligence is better than fruit of work? And then at the beginning of chapter 5, Arjuna again says, I'm confused. Should I renounce work or work with devotion? And then again in chapter 18, he's asking what's the connection between tyag and sannyas, which is a related issue. So how to work is a theme. It's in chapter 2, 3, 5, and 18. And we just talked about it. So here are verses. Arjuna Uvacha Jaya Sisi Chichet Karmanas Te Mata Buddhir Janardana Tat Kim Karmani Gore Mam Neo Jaya Si Keshava. Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want me to engage in this ghastly warfare if you think intelligence is better than fruit of work? And then the following verse, Vyamir Vyamishreneva Vakyena Buddhimo Hohaya Shiva Me Tad Ekam Vada Nishitya Yena Shreyoham Atmuyam. My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be the most beneficial for me. Now, here we have chapter 5. Arjuna Uvacha Sanyasyam Karamanam Krishna Punar Yogam Shasham Shashasi Yachreya Etayor Ekam Tan Me Bruhi Sunishchitam. Arjuna said, O Krishna, first of all, you asked me to renounce work, and then again, you recommend work with the devotion. Now, will you kindly tell me definitely which of the two is more beneficial? And here we have first verse of chapter 18, Arjuna Uvacha Sanyasya Mahabaho Tattvam Ichchami Veditum Tyagasya Cha Hrishikesha Pritakeshi Nishudana. Arjuna said, O mighty armed one, I wish to understand the purpose of renunciation, tyag, and the renounced order of life, sannyas, O killer of the Keshi demon, master of the senses. So this is what's happening right now, that Arjuna is having an issue, and he's trying to understand what Krishna is really telling him. He wants to know what Krishna really wants him to do. And this is not just Arjuna's issue, but many people, many devotees, they find themselves wondering how to engage in Krishna consciousness. What's really the core of Krishna consciousness, or what's really the core of spiritual life in general? How can we know that? So this is what Arjuna wants to know, and actually this is what we want to know as well. And so the confusion comes when we try to understand the difference between work and renouncing the work and renouncing the fruit of work. So this is the key issue. We see that there are various, various types of spiritualists, and they recommend giving up the work itself. We see that what they're actually recommending is that people just sit on their senses. They either meditate, or they engage in very severe austerities, or they withdraw from society. And a lot of people have this kind of misunderstanding that this is what spiritual life is all about. To withdraw. If we can withdraw from the outside world, then actually we are doing the right thing. How can we be doing the wrong thing if we withdraw from the outside world? But of course, first of all, it's totally impractical in the modern day and age for any one of us to withdraw from the outside world. We can't really do it. So what Krishna is asking us is not to sit on the senses, to withdraw from all sense input. He's asking that we withdraw from the result of what we're doing. We can act. So in that way, we commonly see that what devotees do and what people on the outside do, they look pretty much alike. You know, devotees drive cars, people on the outside drive cars. Devotees eat, people on the outside eat. Um, People on the outside play music, devotees play music. Uh, Devotees have an organization, people on the outside have organization. So where's the difference? What's the difference between being a devotee and not being a devotee? And the answer is the difference lies only in one thing, and that is what's the purpose of our activity? What's the purpose of it? So most people, the purpose of their activity is to gratify their senses, to do what feels good. So why we go to work, why we engage in various kinds of um, welfare activities, why we engage in various kinds of activities to keep our safety intact, why we talk to people, why we interact with people, why we organize things. In other words, the whole shooting match, everything in the final bottom line, the whole purpose of it is to get around to enjoying ourselves. You know, after we've made the money, after we've done all of our duties, after we've said and talked and, organized, we hope to enjoy. And nobody questions that that's not the reasonable thing to do. Everybody does it, but it's not the reasonable thing to do. And it doesn't actually make us feel satisfied, although it might seem so. It doesn't actually make us feel satisfied. So, what should we do? And the answer is we should work for Krishna. That's what we should do. And if we do that, um, then we will be able to actually engage in spiritual life. So we're not stopping our work. We're not living naked in a cave somewhere. We're not moving to the Himalayas. We're not giving up all social interactions. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're acting in the world, but we're acting for Krishna. That's the only difference. And how do we act for Krishna? Well, that's why we need a spiritual master. That's why we need to read the Bhagavad-gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. We learn what the details are of how to act for Krishna. So this is the sum and substance. But you can see that in the third chapter here, Arjuna doesn't get it. He has to have it explained again in the fifth chapter. And he sort of gets it pretty much in the fifth chapter, but still he's wondering, how does sannyas relate to renunciation? Are all sannyasis renounced? Or can someone be renounced and not be a sannyasi? These things are confusing to Arjuna. So as Prabhupada said in the purport, in the second chapter, Krishna did a summary. And that's why the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita is called Contents of the Gita Summarized. But actually, the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are also a kind of a summary, but they're not the summary of the Bhagavad Gita. They're the summary of all Vedic literature. So Krishna touched on Buddhi Yoga. He talked on Karma Yoga in chapter 2, but he didn't do it in any elaborate way. So Arjuna winds up being confused in chapter 3 at the beginning, and he asks this question. And then really up till chapter 6, Krishna walks Arjuna through the details of Vedic knowledge and what's most important. And finally, at the end of chapter 6, Krishna tells Arjuna what he really wants Arjuna to do. So it's clear. So now at the end of chapter 6, Krishna has talked about Buddha yoga. He's talked about karma yoga. He's talked about dhyana yoga. He's talked about Ashtanga yoga. He's talked about Sankhya yoga. He's talked about all these things. And so now, between the two of them, all these subjects have been put in a particular place, have been discussed at least briefly. And now he tells Arjuna he wants Arjuna to be a yogi. And because he wants Arjuna to be a yogi, Arjuna could ask, well, what do you mean by being a yogi? I thought you didn't want me to meditate. But Krishna further clarifies by saying the kind of yogi that he wants Arjuna to be. And the kind of yogi is a yogi who always thinks of him. So this means a bhakti yogi. So he's going to act in the world. He's not going to meditate. He's not going to go to a mountaintop. He's going to act in the world, but he's going to act, but following the desire of Krishna. That's how he's going to act. And then this is bhakti yoga. It's not the same as dhyana yoga. It's not the same as Sankhya yoga. It's not the same as Jnana yoga. It's not the same as all these other various kinds of yoga. So this is what Krishna wants Arjuna to do. Okay, so I just want to unfold that much, and then I can ask if any of you all have any questions. Then I want to talk, finish up with the second half about various things that seem like spiritual life, but actually are not. So, question.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
There was, I think when you were sharing your screen, there was something about renunciation, tyag versus the renounced order of life.
Sannyas, yeah.
Sannyas, yeah. And so just to clarify the relationship between the two, in the renounced order of life, the renounced order of life means you are renounced. I don't know. Anyway, can you just clarify the distinction between these two?
Okay, that's a little kind of outside the range of the topic, but I'll just touch it briefly, because these words are being thrown around. If you notice the words being used in Sanskrit in chapter 3 and in chapter 5, you'll see that renunciation and sannyas. So these are terms, and Arjuna is trying to understand the connection between renunciation and the renounced order of life. Of course, the renounced order of life is actually one of the ashrams. So the renounced order of life means that someone has actually taken vows, is no longer connected with the opposite sex, and is engaged in a continual process of preaching to others. They travel and they preach. That's generally the idea of what sannyas is all about. And of course, they're renounced. That's obviously a part of the whole ticket of the renounced order of life. So it's an ashram. The ashrams, of course, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. So these are 4 stages that generally people move through when they are growing up through their lifetime, So the early stages, one is a brahmachari or brahmacharini, and they study, try to learn about spiritual life. Then usually they enter into the married situation, married position of life, and they spend years in marriage, have children, and bring them up, and then gradually renounce into the vanaprastha stage, where in the vanaprastha stage, the husband and wife travel together to holy places, but they detach themselves from the business or from money making. By that time, they're retirees. And then finally, in some cases, there's a separation of even the husband and wife, and the husband takes sannyas. So these are stages of life. They're different from the varnas, which are the kind of occupation that a person has, whether it's a Brahminical qualification for a Brahminical life, or a kshatriya for an administrational warrior, or some kind of administrative life, or the Vaishya Varna, which is for business and banking and cow protection and raising of crops. So that's the Vaishya class. And finally, the Shudra class, which is just a miscellaneous class of those who don't really fit any of the other classes. So those are classes of occupation, whereas Varnas are stages of life. And so this is sannyas. It's a kind of stage of life, and it requires specific various kinds of renunciation. However, tyag, or renunciation, is something for everybody. Everybody can become a renunciate. And again, we're not trying to compete of who can eat the fewest spoonfuls of prasadam. We're not competing with money we can spend on ourselves. We're not competing on, how few baths we can take or something like that. We're competing on giving up the result of our work to Krishna. That's what we mean by renunciation. So that's why that idea is there. So I could sort of give you an overview there.
Is every job that we do? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Susan, can I just follow up real quick? Because the thing I wanted to clarify was that, even though we're all supposed to be renunciants, the what sets sannyasis apart is what? The fact that they are not engaged in family life, and they try to minimize their, material possessions. Is that, and of course the preaching, is that the main distinction between sannyasis and the rest of us?
Yeah, the main distinction of a sannyasi is that they've given up all connection with the opposite sex, and their life is dedicated to preaching. That's really the focus of sannyas life. That's what makes it different. But, and Prabhupada said that if someone is in household life and they're fully dedicated to preaching, and their life is not any more involved in sex life, then essentially there's no difference between them and a sannyas, although they don't have the title or they don't have the technical distinction. But the net effect is the same.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
Okay, so then let me do part 2 here. Let me share my screen.
Just a question.
Someone has a question?
Is every job a person has? I'm retired, and if it's a secret volunteer job, is every job, pleasing to Krishna or in agreement with Krishna's purposes, or it has to be specific ways of giving back?
Wow, your audio sounds like mine did before I joined. I was having those. I couldn't understand a single thing you said, I'm afraid.
Okay. Is every job is every job or every kind of work in accordance with Krishna's wishes or will?
I think the question you're asking is, are all kinds of jobs actually pleasing to Krishna? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's certain kinds of jobs that a person who is struggling to be Krishna consciousness, be in Krishna consciousness, would not take. I mean, we wouldn't take a job of working in a brothel, or we wouldn't take a job of butchering meat or something like that. But um, the occupation that a person has is not important. What's important is whether the fruits of one's activities, in other words, the money that we make, if it's being utilized completely for one's own sense gratification, or being used to serve Krishna in some way. And of course, we will need a certain quantity of money to eat, to have a roof over our head, et cetera, et cetera. But the more that we can set aside for pushing forward Krishna consciousness, the better. And that means that the fruits of our action are going towards pleasing Krishna. So that's really the understanding of different occupations. And of course, individuals are suited for one kind of occupation and usually not for others. Not everyone can be a teacher or a learned person. Not everyone can be a warrior or an administrator or an organizer or a politician. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can, learn how to buy and sell things and make a profit. Not everyone can raise crops. Um, these are special kinds of qualifications that only certain kinds of people have. And these four qualifications have been around forever. And so, according to one's mental and physical nature, they tend to gravitate toward one of these occupations, and then they do it. And it doesn't matter which one, or even if one is in the miscellaneous class, in the Sudra class, where it's just whatever is left over when we talk about other kinds of occupations. Of course, again, we want to avoid taking a sinful occupation like selling liquor to people and things like that. But the fact that we have an occupation is taken as a given. All of us have to have some kind of occupation. But the fact is, we are trying to use our activity, our fruit, the money that comes from our occupation, toward serving Krishna. And we gradually learn how to do that more and more. We learn that we don't really need so much, and that we can use all our other resources that we get for furthering a spiritual project to give Krishna to others. Does that make sense?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So let me share the screen again here. And these are some, I think there's probably limitless ones, but these are some of the things that many people consider to be spiritual life, but they actually are not spiritual life. Some are actually, perverse, but others are just, close but no cigar, as we say. So, um, this is what Arjuna is thinking, that number one, withdrawal from all activity is what spiritual life is about. But this is not spiritual life. If we would withdraw from all activity, first of all, it's artificial. We won't be able to do it for very long. At least most of us won't. 99.99% of us won't be able to do that. So withdrawal from all activity is not really in and of itself spiritual, because what are we doing when we're withdrawing? How long can we stay away from all social interactions? How long can we remain in a cave or try to meditate? How long can we do that? Well, the answer is probably not very long. And the reason it's not very long is because we have desires in our heart, and those desires bubble and bubble, and eventually we're impelled to go do something. So some people consider constant meditation on the void. So there's a class of people who put forward the idea that we can keep our heart or our mind blank and just act without thinking about anything. This is, the Buddhist or the Zen sort of philosophy, that the entire universe is void, and we can avoid suffering by simply not focusing on anything and not desiring anything. We just go through the world without adding to anything or subtracting from anything. And sometimes we sit down in quiet meditation and try to meditate on the void. Or in some cases, number three, we try to merge with Brahman. This is a little different than meditating on the void. Merging with Brahman means that there isn't a void, but rather there is a plenum, a white light, and we want to lose our form, lose our individuality by merging with the white light. And so in a modern day on the internet, you'll see many accounts of people who nearly died or had some mystical experience, and they experienced this white light, which was very soothing, very encompassing, and this is the Brahman. So many times, if people have had such a episode in their lives, then they'll feel happy that they merged with this, and they'll think this must be spiritual life. But the Vedas say no. The reason the Vedas say no is because we're people, we're individuals, and people have character, and they want actual relationships. You can't have any relationships with anything or anyone in Brahman. It's a stage of kind of semi-blissful non-distinction. There's nothing going on in Brahman. Now, it's not, boring in the way that we might think. It's not, distressful. However, there's also nothing going on. So, in a sense, we have to come out of Brahman. And so there's a verse, ye Ravan Daksha Vimukta Manina Strayashtabhavad Avashuddha Buddhaya Aruya Krishna Parampadam Tata Patanti Nadrata Yusmad Angraya. So those who try to merge with Brahman, they will eventually, because of their Avashuddha Buddhaya, their impure intelligence, they will have to come out of Brahman. And Prabhupada says usually when people try to merge with Brahman, they come out and they start, hospitals, or they engage in some kind of political wrangling, or they try to help people with some kind of welfare work, or they, do these kind of things. So this shows that merging with Brahman does not satisfy the soul, because the soul is active. The soul is not ready for eternal passivity in a non-changing eternal merge. It's just not satisfying to the soul. So that's why it doesn't work. Then, of course, we've got the favorite there of the, Bengal, the, Sahajiya tendency, where some people think that spiritual life is trying to imitate the pastimes of Krishna by having gopis, and generally it means, engaging in some kind of music. In this case, in Bengal, it's various kinds of bhajan. But really, the idea is to hook up with various partners, and you travel around and you sing some music, and you have some sex. And because Krishna is with gopis, you just justify that this is also kind of spiritual activity. But actually, it's just very mundane, and you won't get any kind of spiritual progress from this type of endeavor. So we don't recommend it. I'm going to go through some of these other ones, but any questions about so far? Okay. Let me.
Why do you call it eternal passivity? Are we supposed to really stop practicing eternal passivity now?
Okay. I got a 4044 on that one. Transmission totally regardless.
Maharaj, could you repeat Susan's question?
Yes. You call it eternal passivity. We are not ready for eternal passivity. So, any activity, it's just a matter of, it's just putting a name on our activities. The thing is, are we supposed to be passive now?
Did anybody understand what the question was? I'm afraid I can't follow. Sasha? Oh.
I think it was something about, the last sentence was, are we supposed to be passive now? But is it, Susan, what you asked?
Well, I don't know if you can hear me, or I don't know if that is my question. But you call, being ready for eternal passivity. Is that good? So, any activity, and we are putting names to those activities. That's what we're doing. And so, are we not supposed to do anything?
No, I think you missed my point.
I mean, it might seem stupid, but
I was saying that we are not trying for eternal passivity. This is one of what I'm discussing here in this list of things, in this grouping here, is things that are not spiritual, but to many people, this is what they assume is spiritual. So this withdrawal from all activities, that's not really spiritual life. Krishna is explaining why it's not to Arjuna. Constant meditation on the void, that's not spiritual life. We don't want to try to meditate on the void, or are we interested in the void? There is no void. Merging with Brahman, that's what we were talking about, of eternal passivity, we don't want eternal passivity. I mean, some people do, or they think they do, but it won't work in the long run. So that's why we're saying that this is something that to some people seems like spiritual life, but it's not. So that's what all these 14 things are. They're things which to some people seem like spiritual life, but either they're a mistaken view or they're incomplete. In some cases, some of these things are good, but they're not complete. They're not true, full spiritual life. Does that make sense?
Okay,
Okay. Okay.
thank you.
All right. So searching for esoteric meaning in occult literature. Now that's generally what we call the process of Sankhya Yoga or Gyan Yoga, where people go to various meetings. They talk to people. They read all kinds of unusual, far-reaching books with interesting theories, and this is taken as spiritual life by some people. But again, it's not spiritual life. As we were saying, real spiritual life is trying to figure out how to do everything for God, how to use the everyday resources that we have at our disposal, our body, our mind, our intellect, our creativity, how to use that for Krishna. That's spiritual life. And of course, we learn to avoid four things: no intoxication, no meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling. And we learn how to chant Hare Krishna or the Maha Mantra. We learn how to do that a certain amount of times every day. So that's spiritual life. So it's neither void, nor is it involved with sex, nor is it merging with Brahman, nor do we talk about the void, nor are we reading all kinds of various literatures just to figure out what mystical or mysterious thing might lie behind the universe. We know what mystical or mysterious thing lies behind the universe. It's Krishna. We may not know all the details of how exactly he does his stuff, but we know that that's actually what's behind everything. And of course, in our modern world, many times people think that charity is the essence of religion. If we give, in charity, then we are, this is the essence of religion, that we are doing the best thing. And this is a common idea in the modern world. There's nothing wrong with charity, but it's not the full scope of what religion is all about. Most people don't know what kind of charity is the best for people. And even if they do give charity to good and deserving people at the correct time and place, still, in and of itself, just giving charity will not give you true spiritual life. You have to connect yourself to the Supreme Lord and learn how to give everything in charity to the Supreme Lord gradually by the process of bhakti yoga. So sometimes people think performing rituals is the essence of religion. This is another common thing. And this straddles all kinds of religion. In Christianity, people think that performing rituals is the basis of all religion. I mean, rituals have their place, there's no doubt, but just performing some kind of ritual is not enough for true spiritual life. In Hinduism, people perform rituals, various kinds of yagyas and so on and so forth. This is nice, but it's not true spiritual life. Practically speaking, in every religion, people perform some kind of ritual. but this is not what spiritual life is all about. Or neither are severe austerities. You can perform austerities, but they are not spiritual life in its essence. Sometimes people feel that if someone can perform very, very difficult austerities, then such a person must be very spiritual. But it's not necessarily true. Sometimes people are very materialistic, but they can perform austerities because they want some kind of mystic power. Any questions so far about those categories?
Again, going back to rituals, some rituals are spiritual, right? And some are not, isn't it?
Well, rituals can be more or less spiritual, but what we're saying is that's not really the pure substance of religion. That rituals have their place. I mean, we do fire sacrifices, but we don't do them all day long. And you know, in the Western world, in the modern time, actually not just the Western world, but really all over the world in the modern time, mostly people feel, if I follow certain rituals, I must be spiritual, and there's nothing more to it. That's the point that I'm making. People think that, if I observe Christmas, I go to church once a week, people think if, I do the various, Jewish, observances, that's enough, or if I perform yajnas and I give in charity, you know, this is not in and of itself the essence of spiritual life. The essence of spiritual life is connecting with God. That's the essence of spiritual life. These things help, but they're not the full picture. So there's nothing wrong, I say, with giving in charity. It's just that most people, you know, uh, give rituals and charity the whole picture of spiritual life. If you're doing rituals, you're engaged in some charity, then essentially there's nothing more. There's nothing more to think about, nothing more to talk about. You may be completely materialistic, you may be giving charity for the wrong reasons. You may be performing rituals because they're easy for you. If you're very wealthy, then no big sweat off your back to throw a few pennies out and perform some rituals. But it's not the essence of religion. That's my point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it doesn't define, these things don't define religion, basically, right?
It's not the heart or the essence of religion.
Thank you.
I thought that since this chapter starts off with Arjuna's needing clarification from Krishna about the nature of spiritual life, I thought that I would kind of broaden the category out into other things, which in our modern world usually get paraded on placards as being the substance of spiritual life. Usually we hear people saying, that this is so spiritual, and what they are quoting as being so spiritual is usually one of these other categories, which, as I say, some of which are actually the antithesis of spiritual life, and some are just not the whole picture. So severe austerities, we talked about that. We don't care about severe austerities. Maybe you can do them, maybe you can't. They can help. There's nothing, again, wrong with austerities. But again, like rituals and charity, they're not the whole picture. Now, mostly people perform severe austerities. Why? For mystic yoga. Now, why do people perform mystic yoga? People perform mystic yoga so they can get various kinds of magical powers for the most part. So people perform austerities, they perform meditation and yoga, they sit in very awkward and difficult postures, they spend many hours practicing asanas, and then they control their breathing. Why? Usually they do it so they can get some mystic power. And many people would label this as spiritual, but it is not spiritual. It's material, because having some kind of mystic power, what's the purpose of it? Maybe, some people use it for healing others, or for some kind of, good work in the world. But mostly, it's like being Superman or something like that. You have these powers. And so people are following you because you can display some kind of mystic potency. Now, here's another few things that sometimes commonly are, you know, talked about as spiritual life, is raising the Kundalini energy. Now, this is supposedly a mystical experience, and certainly it is if you do it properly. But there's every chance things can go wrong, because you don't know what you're doing. You can disturb the energies of your body, and you can have all kinds of mental difficulties as a result of misaligning the Kundalini energy. So we don't recommend this, but there are people who think of the Kundalini energy. This is one of the types of mystic yoga, of sitting in a yoga posture and trying to align and to motivate in various directions these various internal channels of energy, like the Kundalini energy. And so this requires severe austerities, and some people might consider this spiritual, but it's really not. And then we have the Agora Panta, or the left-handed path. This is another thing that comes to us from India, and is kind of a blend of Buddhism, Vaishnavism, and even some Islam in there, So this system comes out of Tantra, which are some various Vedic literatures. And it starts out, or at least it purports to be, the easy path. So in this way, the Agora Panta has connections with the, Bolas, Olas, and the, various Sahajiya sects, that engage in various kind of sexuality on the pretext of it being spiritual in some way or another. And also, there's usually generous amounts of intoxicants in this path as well. People usually smoke ganja or marijuana and hashish and these things, and this is all a part of the Agora path. The Agora path is to become equal to everything so that you neither desire or fear anything. And of course, you have to push yourself through various extremes to get there. And there are many questionable activities that are involved in this, So some activities are downright disgusting. Others are, extreme forms of, sexual indulgence. Whereas others are just flat out dangerous. So these are what some people consider spiritual. In other words, we see that spiritual or the concept of it is very vague in modern society, and it encompasses anything sort of out of the ordinary. But communing with ghosts or going to a latrine and immerging yourself up in the poop, or going to a burning gut where a body is being cremated and then bludgeoning the brain cavity open, the head cavity open, and eating the brains. This kind of stuff is, the kind of things that Agorapanta people do. Not all of them, because it's a whole mixed bag of people doing various things. But these are the activities that are supposed to push one beyond the senses of the body and beyond attraction and repulsion. But again, the goal of life is not to be beyond attraction and repulsion. The goal of life is to learn how to serve God. So, of course, we talked about already achieving yoga powers. And some say that spiritual life is about giving up all desires. Now, we cannot give up all the desires, because even the desire to give up all desires is a desire. So you're stuck with that one, if none other. So giving up all desires is not possible. However, what is possible is giving up all material desires. That we can't. And that's what Bhakti Yoga is about. We learn how to give up all material desire. And finally, many people think that spirituality is just following basic morality. Of course, we should obviously follow basic morality, but that's not the complete picture to spiritual life. There's more to it than that. So the real morality is learning how to give your whole life to God. And that's what Bhakti Yoga is centered around, a practical way to learn how to give your whole life to God. Okay, so questions about that?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yeah,
I have thanks for the class. Very interesting. I was just, I was just going to ask, like, you mentioned all these things, like example, not of spiritual life, but it happens. So it's happening like nowadays that I see, like in devotee communities, there are some devotees who, this incident happened, like they're offering this like healing. They're sending out emails to everybody that, register for this like healing workshop, and of course pay some money. Usually it's very expensive. In this case, it was like, I believe it was like $2,000 for like a couple of weeks. And it's completely bogus, like healing and Ayurveda. And so like should one like criticize these, or because I see like it's very manipulative that, like trying to like make money through devotees, like some devotees trying to make money from other devotees. And, it's, so I don't know what to do in such situation. Like, I mean, it really looks like it's not healing, because it's, they claim to cure like psychological diseases, but, like having gone through therapy myself, I know it's not easy to like you need to go to a trained psychologist or therapist for, if for some trouble. But, like seeing this happen in the community, like, and using all kinds of jargon like Ayurveda and, all that. So I don't know like what to do in such situation, because if we criticize, then it's like, like if we warn others, then it's like, kind of a tough spot, like criticizing devotees. But, at the same time, knowing it's not right, so.
Right. Our first, focus is to, get a solid base in Krishna consciousness. And then, after that, then we can, do some other kind of activities that might help. It's kind of, if you're going to cure the disease, you need to, first of all, establish an actual cure for the disease. Then, once you've established a strong regimen for curing the disease, then you can start to work with trying to find some kinds of fixes for various symptoms that are very difficult. So people have issues in their lives. Either they're lonely, they're depressed, they're in pain, they're fearful, they're frustrated, they're angry, they have issues with other people. People have all these different problems. They may have health issues as well as psychological issues, and so forth. The one fix for all of it is of course, a solid connection with Krishna consciousness. And as we've been talking about, Krishna consciousness means to attempt to follow regular sadhana that we are chanting every day. Ideally, we are having some morning program every day. We are reading, we're associating with devotees, we're learning how to do service of various kinds. If these things are there, then you've established the real cure for whatever issue you have. And then if there's time for some of these other things to kind of alleviate particular symptoms, then there's no harm there. But sometimes people just substitute one of these material, regimens or material processes in place of Krishna consciousness. They aren't really, either because they don't understand what Krishna consciousness really is, or because they just aren't determined enough to actually follow it. For one of those two reasons, they're not doing it. So they're not getting the real result of Krishna consciousness. As Krishna says, Yayatamam prapadyante, as they surrender to me, I reward them accordingly. So if you're surrendering only very, very minimally, then you can't expect much of a full result in your activities of Krishna consciousness. You won't find yourself having all the necessary result. And so therefore, people think, well, I have to try something else. And then they start to substitute. And sometimes they go to great extremes, both financially and also with time. They use an enormous amount of time and finance to try one of these alternative, natural or spiritual processes to help themselves. When if they just spent the same amount of effort in genuine, simple Krishna consciousness, they would have gotten more of a result. But again, I'm not throwing everything into the same basket. that there are times and places where someone might want or even need to engage in one of these, you know, methodologies to pull themselves out of a particular problem. That's how I would respond.
So Maharaj, I just I just like a follow up. So you know, let's say if someone needs help, or if someone knows someone needs help, should we direct them to well, for example, about mental health, you know, is it better to go to like a licensed psychologist, or should one try out one of these, you know, like Ayurveda, like, you know, kind of Ayurveda?
Well,
So,
it's hard to give a, you know, no single rule for those kind of things, because you know, certain things work for some people and they don't work for other people. So in general, yes, I would say, you know, stick with more tried and tested things. And of course, if you're actually seriously engaged in spiritual life, in Krishna consciousness, chanting, engaging in sadhana, doing service, associating with devotees. If you're doing that, then whatever else you add to it, it's not going to really make you or break you. You know, it may help actually, but if you're trying to substitute one of these other processes, even Ayurveda or something that's Vedic by its nature, like some other kind of meditational process, you'll find that that will become a distraction for you, and eventually it will seem to be more and more important to you than actual Krishna consciousness. You know, I saw a whole episode of this happen in New Vrindavan at one time, where the devotees just kind of got carried away with this other, you know, spiritual so-called process, and you know, they spent an enormous amount of money and time going from place to place, learning various secret, you know, techniques, etc., etc. When they could have just engaged in Krishna consciousness and spent the money in something there. But you know, sometimes people have to go through these kind of things, and in the end, I think they come back around.
Maharaj, it just reminds me like of a high profile case. I don't want to name anybody, but you know, like one of the biggest fall downs which happened was because of Tantra. You know, I read more into it, and you know, like Swami in, you know, in Russia. So maybe like you know, who used to preach in Russia, not Russian, but that case I heard like devotees, they just listened to a tantric, and then on he started giving drugs and stuff like that, like once he had a little bit of trust. So you know, it just reminded of this
Anyways, that's there's about 3 or 4 ways that spiritual life goes off the berm and into the ditch on the right hand side of the road. You know, there's about 3 or 4 ways, one of which is getting involved in sex life in some way or another, and pretending that in some way it's spiritual. Another way is to get involved in intoxication and pretending that it's spiritual in one way or another. Another way is getting involved in caste consciousness, where you're born in a certain family, that means everything, and if you're not born in a certain family, you can't expect anything. Another way spiritual life goes off is where we get lost in rituals and feel that just because we're doing rituals, that's all that's required of us. You know, and another way is that we just begin to feel that it's an affair of the heart, and then that we can just figure it out just by meditating on what's the right thing to do. You know, these are all various and classical ways where spiritual life gets, you know, degenerated by too much emphasis on the wrong thing. So, well, anyway, yes, I think he's got his hand up there. I think we're coming to the end here.
Hare Krishna. I thought I would have a nice supplement to what you're saying. As to medical means of addressing physical medical issues, psychological medical issues for a devotee of Krishna. I think, it can be particularly psychological, but even physical, because there are certainly psychological and physical issues are connected. I think it's relevant to consider if a person is 100% Krishna conscious, like Rupa Goswami, where he's seeing Krishna while in his physical body, then the need to say take ibuprofen, it's kind of irrelevant. And for someone who's maybe a very good devotee or maybe a beginner devotee, but not necessarily like empowered the way Rupa Goswami was, they may be completely pure or they may be just a beginner, but then addressing a certain physical or psychological need through standard material means that non-devotees use can be practical and can actually be useful in elevating one spiritually, and consistent with the teaching, the doctrine of Yukta Vairagya, using a material thing in Krishna consciousness. And I'm thinking of a couple of examples aside from the ibuprofen, which I thought was kind of good. But another one I'm thinking of is, I'm old enough that I don't mind mentioning, before I became a devotee, I was, sometimes I was getting intoxicated quite a bit as a teenager and so forth. No, it's not. And I know that, like many other persons who, there's many people who either were addicted to cigarettes or other intoxicants, and by practicing Krishna consciousness, for some such people, not for all, it giving up those material crutches to achieve a temporary kind of happiness was a cinch. It was so easy. It wasn't like, for me, it happened without even trying. It was just, I barely didn't try. But a few years back, when I would try to give that up without Krishna consciousness as a means to help, I could give it up, for a few months, and then there it came again. And then on the other hand, let's say that someone has a severe diagnosis of a psychological issue, such as schizophrenia.
I have to run to the bathroom. I'll be right back.
Okay, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. Fine.
Right back.
So if someone has a severe issue such as schizophrenia, and Maharaj, he just took off his headphone. Okay. If one has a severe issue such as schizophrenia or something like that, then perhaps if one is engaged in completely 100% in Krishna consciousness like Rupa Goswami, then they can even transcend that. But it may be appropriate for someone who's not at that such a spiritual level that it's almost unique among us mortals here, then it may be appropriate to take the same Western medicine, or at least certain types of Western medicine that a non-devotee would take. So of course, this issue for some people becomes a little bit hard to understand and how to apply for devotees. And of course, there's also other people within other spiritual groups who sometimes take a very strong position that other spiritual people would think is beyond rational, and they think it's totally consistent with spiritual life. Like, for example, Christian scientists, and many diehard or staunch Christian scientists, I should say, will refrain from Western medicine, even to, you know, putting aside a mental health issue, just to address a physical health issue. They won't do it, right? And sometimes there's bad press for that. So that's an example of how someone, based on their understanding of something spiritual, will discard all means of material means of addressing health issues. I don't believe that that's consistent with the Vedic teachings. It's certainly not consistent with what Prabhupada actually did. He would, you know, he was trained in pharmacy before becoming a devotee, and he was often even advising disciples certain physical remedies to different diseases. So anyway, that's all I wanted to add. Now we're waiting for Maharaj to come back. And then, Maharaj, you can't hear me yet, right? Because you're, okay, he's putting on his headphones, so.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, Maharaj, so I just finished making my point, and then Subi reminded me, as you did before I started, that we're probably just about to wrap up. So, but I'll hand it over to, I finished my long-winded point, so I'm done.
Okay. So shall we do a quick kirtan, or we have time for that, or how does it work?
Yeah, that would be wonderful, Maharaj, if you chant a little bit of Hare Krishna, and then we'll formally wrap up.
Okay. Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gaurabhani Prachadine Nirvishesa Sunyabadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Jaya Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radhe. Jaya Radha Govinda, Radha Govinda, Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramamsa Paravajikacharya Shri Manasai Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Anantanta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad-gita Ki Sam Beta Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga.
If everyone would like to join me expressing appreciation for His Holiness Chandrasekhara Maharaj for giving us his high quality association this evening and explicating Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, please unmute yourself now, and here we go. His Holiness Chandrasekhara Maharaj Ki Jai. Hari Bol. Hari Bol.